What's up everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be introducing background tasks in FastAPI. So a background task is any task or any process that we may want to push or offload off our request response cycle so that we improve the performance of our application. And it is just as simple as that. Whenever I have a task that is going to take a lot of time and delay the rate at which responses are being got by our clients, then that task is to be pushed to a background task. And lucky for us, FastAPI has inbuilt support for background tasks, but we can also use some battery included solution like, let's say, Celery. And I'm going to be explaining all that in this video. So the first thing we're going to look at is a simple example of a task that takes a lot of time. So for now, we have things like sending verification emails and password resets that involve the sending of emails. So let us go ahead and try to create a user account. So right here, I have my database that has been cleared, so we do not have any data inside our database. And what I'm going to do is to try to create new user accounts using the credentials that have valid emails, that the ones I used in the previous video. So I'm going to go back to creating a user account, and when I try to create a user account, we shall notice that there is a slight delay at which the response is going to be returned. So we now see that this request is going to take 4.92 seconds, which is close to 5 seconds to complete. And even in my terminal right here, we'll see that the response is being returned after 4.88 seconds, which is kind of slow compared to how we may have wanted it to be. So in this case, background tasks are the way to go. We may push the sending of the email to a background task so that we don't have to wait for the response to be returned to the user and still have to send them the email. So let us begin by looking at how we are going to implement that. So to start, I'm going to go to that exact endpoint for creating a user account. And in that endpoint, what I'm going to do is to push this line that sends the email, just like we did in the previous video. So this is FastAPI mail, sending the email. But this task kind of takes a lot of time. So what I'm going to do is to push it to a background task. And for us to do that, we are going to be making use of an inbuilt dependency that FastAPI provides for us. And that is going to be the background tasks dependency. So using this class, we can be able to create an object, and that object will have different methods that will enable us to push a task or a process to the background so that it executes there and doesn't block the response. So what I'm going to do is to go back to our endpoint that creates a user account, and what I'll do is to just come right in here, and inside our dependencies or inside our parameters for that path handler, I'll add one that I'm going to call background tasks, but I'll shorten it to BG tasks, and that will be of type background tasks. And once that is done, then I'm going to simply go ahead and basically add this to a background task. So to add this to a background task, I'll get rid of the await, and then all I have to do is to say BG tasks dot, in this case we shall say add task. So this is going to be add task, and then we shall add that specific method that sends the email. So for our case, it's going to be mail.send message, and the first argument that we have to provide to the add task is going to be the function or the task that we want to send to the background. So our case is going to be mail.send message, and the second one is going to be all arguments to the task that we provided. So for our case, we have one argument which is going to be our message. So we have basically added this to the background. Now if we try to make the same request, so for our case, we are going to go ahead and change these details. So let me try to create a new user. I'll create this user with new credentials for a valid email, and then we try to create the user account using background tasks in this case. So I'll provide the first name as Jonathan, the last name as Sally, and when I send, we're now going to see that our request is being returned in milliseconds compared to where our response was being returned after 5 seconds. So even when you go right here, we are now seeing that the response has been returned after 0.45 seconds. So basically, that took less time than what it did at first. So that's how background tasks work. You just offload a task from your request response cycle so that you can be able to return a response while that task is being executed in the background. I hope that has given you a brief introduction to background task in FastAPI. While FastAPI background tasks can be useful, there are going to be scenarios in which you may need to use a much more batteries included solution such as Celery. Now, such scenarios may include ones in which you have multiple background tasks running on the same server. So when you have these background tasks running on the same server, that actually means you're going to put a lot of load on your server, and that can bring a lot of performance issues. Now, Celery, on the other hand, allows you to run these processes on different servers if you want to, and therefore increases performance by a very great percentage. So we're going to be looking at how we can use Celery. So to begin, we're going to install Celery. I'm going to open up a new terminal right here, and I'll type pip install Celery, and this will go ahead and add Celery to our virtual environment. Once Celery has been installed, we are now going to go ahead and set up Celery. So I've created a simple diagram right here that's going to allow us to understand the different concepts that are involved when working with Celery. So the first concept is going to be the Celery client. So the Celery client simply refers to any code that you're going to write to interface or to work with Celery. So this client code is going to help us define the tasks that we need to send to Celery for execution. And this is the same code that's going to allow us to push those tasks into the task queue. So another concept is that of the broker. A broker is simply a way through which messages are going to be sent from our Celery client to the Celery workers. So inside the broker is where we find the task queue, and that's where we're going to send every message that we shall be sending from our client. Now, workers are going to be processes that are going to look into our queue to find any task that is going to be available for execution. Once these tasks have been got, then these workers will go ahead and run those tasks, execute them, and if a result backend has been set up, then the results of those tasks will be sent there for storage. So think of a result backend as a simple database for storage of results once they are executed from our tasks. So then our Celery client will also be able to see the results of tasks, understand the statuses of such tasks, and so on. Now that we have a simple understanding of how Celery works, let us go ahead and set up Celery. So to begin, I'm going to move to our code right here. And the first thing I'm going to do is to update our configuration so that we can make use of Celery. So the first thing I'm going to do is to set up the broker URL. Now we're going to be using Redis in this video as our broker. So think of the broker as a medium that is going to allow us to send our messages to workers. We're going to be looking at how to set that up right now. So we're going to set up a simple variable called our broker URL. Now our broker URL is going to point to Redis that we already have installed, and we're also going to look at how we're going to update our Redis config so that we can be able to simply use a URL instead of the credentials we've so far been using. So this is going to be our Redis URL. Now I'm going to get rid of the host and the port so that we just substitute them with the Redis URL. So this is going to be a string, but then we want to make this have a default value. So I'm going to make this have a default value of the URL for our local Redis, which is going to be Redis on localhost. And then the port is going to be the default port, which is 6379. Then we can also point to a database such as database 0, and that's what we're going to be using for our Redis URL. Now this means I also have to go ahead and update where we actually set up our Redis when working with our token revoking. So to do that, I'll head over to redis.py inside source.db, and then I'll have to update our Redis. I'll have to update our Redis instance so that we can be able to use the Redis config instead of the credentials like we set up right here. So what I'm going to do is to come right here, and then what I'll say is io redis dot, in our case, from URL. Now there's a concern that was raised in the previous videos where people were saying that the io redis package is not fully supported or is not supported anymore, which is actually right. So for those, I highly recommend that you use the Redis client or the Redis official client, since it now has support for async IO, and the functions still remain the same. So for you to be able to use it, what you're going to do is to just come right here and say import Redis dot async IO as IO Redis. So that's going to still work the same way. So once you have that, then you can simply go ahead and still access the same function. So you can say IO Redis dot from URL, and for our case we can still point to our URL as config dot, in our case this is going to be our Redis URL. So once that has been set up, now let's go ahead and set up our Redis for our Celery. So I'm going to set the broker URL to our config dot, for our case that's going to be our Redis URL, and then we're also going to set up a result backend because we want to keep track of the results of the tasks. So what I'll do is to just come right here and say result backend, and our result backend in this case is going to be config dot, so for our case we shall still use our Redis URL. Now with that done, let us go ahead and look at how we can create our first task. So just like we looked at when using background tasks, we can simply go ahead and modify this task of sending our emails so that it's a Celery task. So to do that, we are going to go ahead and simply copy the code that is basically shared on every instance of sending an email, and that is basically creating a message as well as sending that message as a background task. So I'm going to copy this and then I'll move it to our config.py. Actually, I'm going to move it to a file that's specific to Celery. So to set up our Celery, which I haven't actually done, we have set up our Celery config. Now we need to go ahead and create what is called a Celery app. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. So this new file is what I'm going to call our Celery tasks.py. So inside our Celery tasks.py, we're going to first of all create a Celery app instance, or the Celery app. So to do that, we're going to first of all import Celery. And once we've imported Celery, we are going to create our Celery app as an instance of our Celery class. Once we've created this, then we're going to point to the configuration that we've so far set up in our config.py. So to do that, I'm going to come and say Celery app dot config. So we can configure it from the command line, from environment variables. We can also use that dot from object that will take in the file or module where our configuration is. So remember that we've set our configuration in the config.py file or module that's present inside our source folder directory. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and modify that and simply provide the value of source.config. So that's going to be where our Celery configuration is going to be found. So once I'm done with that, then I'm going to create our first task. So to create a task, we have to just have a function, and for my case, our function is going to be send email. So this is going to take in whatever arguments, but we're going to just simply place the code for sending an email inside here. And to mark a function as a Celery task, what you have to do is to create a decorator using our Celery app instance, and that is going to be the one to mark a function as a Celery task. So for us to do that, I'm going to come right here, and all I have to do is to say at Celery app. For our case, we shall go ahead and call the task function. And once we've called the task function, now this means that this is a Celery task. So once we've been able to do this, now we're going to modify our function so that we make it one that's going to be executed by Celery. So I'm going to first of all import what is undefined within our Celery task file, and I think that is where we get the mail object and the create message function. So I'll come right here and I'll add them, and that will be just enough for us to get rid of those undefineds. I'm also going to remove this bg.addTasks, and then once that is done, we shall just remain with our send message and its one argument, which is the message to be sent. Now, one thing that's important to note is Celery tasks are not going to be asynchronous. So Celery does not have the support for sending asynchronous tasks inside our function. So basically, if you're to run your asynchronous code inside your Celery tasks, what you have to do is to figure out a way to convert that async code or to make it run within your synchronous code. So I've been looking around and I found a very nice tool that is created by the same people who created the Django web framework, and that is called the ASCII ref. So ASCII ref provides a lot of function wrappers, but it simply provides those that help you to convert or make your asynchronous code run within the context of synchronous code. So it also provides the function wrapper that will be allowing you to run your synchronous code inside the context of synchronous code. So if you're confused about that, I'm going to be showing you how that can be done. So we're going to begin by importing or installing ASCII ref. I'm just going to come right here and I'll say pip install ASCII ref. And once I've installed ASCII ref, then we shall be having the ability to use this coroutine, which is our create or send message function, which comes from FastAPI mail, inside the context of our synchronous send mail or send email function. So what I'm going to do is to first of all get this. So I'm going to remove this and create a parameter called recipients. And then I'm also going to get a parameter called subject. So I'm going to make sure that all of these are dynamic by simply providing them as parameters. Then I also provide the HTML message. So what I'm going to come and do is to go inside our send mail function. And what I'll do here is to just come right here and say that we shall have recipients. So our recipients are going to be a list of recipients. And that will be a list. So I'm simply going to come and say that this will be a list. And this list can be a list of strings. So those are going to be emails. And then once I've been able to do that, then we can also have our subject. So our subject is also going to be a string. And then we can also have our body. So our body will be a string. So that's going to be the details of the message that's going to be sent within our email. So one thing we've done is to go ahead and call this send message function, but just like I explained, it's a coroutine, and therefore we have to first make sure that it is converted into code that can simply run with our synchronous function. So I'm going to first of all import that function that's going to help us achieve that. So I'll say from ASCII ref dot, in our case we're going to import the sync module, and inside it we shall go ahead and get access to the async to sync function. So this is a function that is going to help us to basically convert asynchronous code to synchronous code so that we can run it inside the context of synchronous code. So one thing I need to do is just go ahead and convert this mail.send into an asynchronous function. So to do that, I'll just come and call async to sync, and then what I'll do is to provide our send mail, and if we want to run it, then we have to go ahead and provide these extra brackets. So then we have to go ahead and provide this specific message. So I'll go ahead and provide the message that we've created right here, and this will be just enough for us to send the message. So one thing I've missed here is going to be our body, so I think I need to go ahead and just remove the HTML message, replacing it with a body. And yeah, we've created our first Celery task. Now we need to go ahead and call this function, and for us to call this function, we need to call it not as a normal function but as a Celery task. So if we want to achieve that, then what we're going to do is to simply go within our routes, and I'm going to go to that specific part where we have these specific functions, or where we actually go ahead and send emails. So I'll go ahead and get rid of all the code that we've written for sending messages, and what I'll do is to go ahead and replace it with our Celery task. So I'll go at the top right here and I'll first import the task that we've created. So I'll say from .celery tasks, actually that's going to be from source.celery tasks. We are going to go ahead and import our send email function or task. So for our case, for us to go ahead and call that, all we have to do is to just say send email. But instead of calling it as a normal function, we are going to go ahead and call it as a Celery task. So to call it as a Celery task, we're going to use that .delay method, and then we shall provide all the arguments that are present inside that specific task. So our first one is going to be our recipients. Now I'm going to provide our recipients as emails, and then we shall have the subject. So for our case, our subject is going to be welcome to the app. So I'll just say our subject is going to be our subject, and then I'll create a variable called our subject. So our subject in this case is going to be welcome to our app, and then when I have that, then I'll have the body. I think that's the last argument. So that's exactly what we shall provide right here. So our body is going to be equal to our HTML. So I'll just go ahead and provide our HTML just like you see right there. So this has updated our code to make sure that we send our emails as a Celery task. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and it's the same thing that we're going to do after creating a user account. So I'm going to get rid of all this, and then I'll replace it with send email.delay. So here I need to come up with a list of emails where we're going to actually send the email. So I'm just going to create that, and emails is going to be a list of our emails, but for our case we want to send to the user email that we've got right here. Now the subject for our message is going to simply be verify your email. So I'll just come right here and say that our subject is going to be verify your email. And then we can also have the body, which is going to be our HTML. So I think that's what we have here as our HTML message. Now I'm going to just go ahead and update that, and then this will be just enough for us to send our email. So I'm going to go ahead and save. Now it seems like I have an error somewhere. Let me just go ahead and fix that. So it's this small equal sign. So once that has been fixed, now let's go ahead and look at how we can run our tasks. So to run our tasks, we first of all have to go ahead and run a Celery worker. So a Celery worker is going to be a process that's going to run independent of our server, and all it's going to do is to look for tasks that are present within the queue. Once these tasks are available, it's going to then execute those tasks so that we can finally get the results out of executing those tasks. So to begin, I'm going to open up a terminal right here. So I'm going to simply make that terminal independent of the one to run our server. So our server is not running, but I'm going to simply restart it with FastAPI dev and then source. And once that is done, then we shall also open up another terminal where we're going to run our Celery worker process. So to run Celery, all we have to do is to just access the Celery command. Once we have Celery installed, we're going to have the Celery command, and these are some of the commands that are present with that command or sub commands. So right now, we are going to simply go ahead and run Celery, and we have to point to the app that we're going to be using as our app. So the app in Celery is going to be the module in which our Celery instance or Celery app is found. Now if we want to access that, all we have to do is to go ahead and access that with source, and for our case we can go ahead and point to source.celery tasks, and that will simply go ahead and identify our Celery tasks as where the app instance is. But since we have not called it Celery tasks, or since we have not called it app, then we have to go ahead and specify that our app is C app, because that's the Celery app instance. In case we had called it app, then it will directly see where the Celery app instance is, and therefore we run our Celery. So we then have to go ahead and specify what we want to create. So for our case, we want to create a worker, so we have to provide the worker sub command. When we press enter, this is going to go ahead and run Celery as a process. So right now we can see some of the details, and we are seeing that this is running a worker. So this is the Celery worker right here, and it's running it on this platform, which is our Linux machine. We have our app, and then we have the transport. So the transport is going to be the broker, which I defined as us Redis. So we see the Redis URL that we provided right here. We also see the result backend that we've set up. We see concurrency, so 4, and then task events off. But then we see a warning right here. So this warning is telling us the broker connection retry configuration setting will no longer determine whether broker connection retries are made during startup in Celery 6 and above. So if we to retain the existence behavior, then you should set this. So I'm going to go ahead and modify our configuration to add this. So I'm just going to go ahead. So I press Ctrl C. That's why the Celery worker is going to stop. But then what I'll have to do is to copy this specific part right here, and then head over back to our configurations. So I'll search for our config.py, and then I'll add one configuration. So in this case, I'll just go ahead and set it to true, just like I've been advised. So I'll just come right here and say true. Once that is done, then the next thing is going to be for me to restart our worker. So that's going to go ahead and run our app, or run our Celery worker. So now that there are no warnings that are being given, we are good to go. So let's now go ahead and experiment with the task that we have created. So to begin, I'm going to create a new terminal, and I'm going to open up my Python shell. So I'll say Python 3. So once I've been able to do that, I'll then go ahead and import our task. So I'll say from Celery, or from source.celery tasks. In this case, we are going to go ahead and import our send email function. So once the send email function has been imported, then we're going to go ahead and simply call it with some arguments. So in this case, if we go ahead and let's say call it with, let's just create some simple arguments. So the first one is going to be our recipients. So I'm going to come right here and provide our recipients as a list of recipients. Now I'm going to go ahead and provide my email. And once I provided my email, this is going to be a list. Now I need to also go ahead and provide the subject. So our subject is going to be, let's say, sample email. So once I've been able to do that, then I'll finally provide the message or the body that I want to send. So I'll say that our body is going to be, let's say, h1. And then in this case, I'll say sample message. And then I'll close that. And once I've been able to do that, when you call this function, you shall now see that I hope that everything is terminated. So for now, we see that this function is being called, but in this case, it's not being called as a Celery task. So we can even check our email to confirm if the email has been sent. So what I'll do is to open up my browser right here, and I'll go to my email. And then I see that our sample message has been received, but this is not being sent as a Celery task. So this is being sent on the same processes that we are sending or running our application, and that's why we see our message has been run. So one thing that we need to know is this is not a Celery task, and therefore Celery has not executed it. So even in our Celery console, we're not going to be seeing anything. But in case we want to run it as a Celery task, then what we're going to do is to simply call that .delay method, just like we did in our functions for sending the emails, just like we did right here. So just going to simply go back to where we sent that email. So we're going to run it the same way that we did right here. So what I'll do is to simply copy this, or I'll just actually go ahead and manually type it. So I'll say send email. So I guess that's going to be a send email, and then we shall call that .delay, and let's actually just call this task 1, and our task 1 is simply going to be one that's going to send our email. So we say send email.delay, then I'll go ahead and provide our recipients. So our recipients is going to be a list of recipients, but this is going to be a list. Now let me provide my list of recipients. And then I'm going to go ahead and provide. So the next thing is going to be our subject. So our subject still is going to be our sample email. Once that is done, then I'm going to go ahead and provide our HTML or our body. So our body in this case, I'll just provide an H1, and this H1 is still going to be sample message. So once this is done, I'm going to go ahead and simply close the brackets, and then we shall have our first task created. Now, if we call our first task, so it's going to be task 1, we shall see that instead of returning the result, we are getting what is called an async result object. And even in our Celery, we are going to notice that nothing has been called. So this task has been added to our queue, and we can even be able to see its result. So for our case, we can actually check for the status. If we run task 1, we can actually see the result of this. So we can actually see the status first. We can now see that this has been executed, therefore our email has been sent, but all this is being done in the background. So if we go to our email, we shall now see that this email has been sent, and therefore we have a sample email. Now, to make this interesting, we can actually try to do some logging to show whether our tasks are being run. So for now, I'm not getting any logging whatsoever. That's why you see that I'm simply getting a plain console here. So what I'm going to do is to first of all stop the worker. And when I stop the worker, I'm going to go ahead and do some printing inside our Celery tasks. So I'm going to go ahead and simply print email sent. And once that is done, so every time you update the Celery task code, you have to also go ahead and restart your worker. So I'm going to restart our worker. And once I've restarted our worker, now I'm going to go inside here and let's say create another task. So I'm just simply going to create a task, and that's going to be my task 2. So for our case, this is going to be send email, and then I'll provide the recipient list. So I'll provide the same email right here. And then I'll go ahead and provide a simple message. So in our case, let's say sample mail 2. I've actually made a syntax error. So let me just repeat the entire thing. Then I'll provide simple mail 2, and then I'll provide the HTML. So the HTML in this case, I'll just simply create an H1, and this H1 is going to be another sample message. Now let me make this a little bit bigger. So once this is done, I'm going to go ahead and close the brackets. And now when I press enter, this task will be executed. So even here, it seems like I'm not getting any logging from my Celery tasks. So, but then we can check its status. So for example, if we check for the status of task 2, so none type object has no attribute status. So I think this is not being sent because I didn't call it as a task. So for me to fix this, still I can go ahead and still call it as a task. So that's the mistake I did. So this is going to be task 2 which is send email, is going to be task 2.delay, and then we can simply go ahead and provide the rest of the arguments that we passed in here. So we're going to provide the recipient list, then we shall provide the subject and then the body of that email. So let me go ahead and close this, and now that will be enough for us to get our task run. So still, now we can see that our email has been sent because of the login we've set up, and then we can also see the status of our task. So for example, we can know task2.status, and that will show us that this has been successfully run. So even when we have tasks that have failed, we can still see the status of those tasks via the task status. But all this happens because we set up a result backend to do that. When we check our email, we now see that our task has been sent, but this email has been sent from our background tasks, just like we did. So while showing your task or seeing the statuses of your tasks from your terminal can be enough, there may be instances where you want a more detailed, more beautiful representation of the statuses of your tasks and how long those tasks took, or which tasks actually also failed. So that brings to you the need for you to have a visual interface or a graphical user interface that can allow you to see the progress of your tasks and the details of those specific tasks. So Celery has a graphical user interface, which is a web interface that helps you to see the progress of your tasks, your workers, and other details about your Celery workers. And that's what we're going to be looking at right now. So to install Flower, all we're going to do is to go inside our terminal right here. So I'm going to get rid of what we are performing with Ctrl and Z. And then I'll begin by installing Flower. So I'll say pip install Flower, and this will go ahead and install Flower within our virtual environment. And once Flower has been installed, then we can go ahead and run Flower for our Celery worker. Now for Flower to work, there has to be a result backend first, and therefore we also need to have a Celery worker that's running. For us to run Flower, it's going to be as easy as running our Celery. So we can run Celery with the configuration that we've set up. So I'm simply going to do the same thing with Celery, and then we shall point to our app, which is going to be source.celery tasks.celery app, and then in this case we shall just run the Flower sub command. And once when we run this, we're going to run a new task. So here we see our Celery module. So the module source.celery tasks C app was not found. So this is the mistake I did. That was supposed to be Celery tasks.celery app. So when you run this, we now see that we've started a new process or a new web server, but this is running a web interface, and that's going to be on our broker, which is our Redis. And then you should also look for any tasks that we've registered. So for now we have one task, which is going to be the one to send our emails, but there are also other tasks that are specific to Celery, just like you see right here. Now one other thing I forgot to mention is Celery also has that mechanism of auto-discovering the tasks that we've created. So it will go ahead and look through our code and then find those tasks that we've created with our Celery app instance with which we've run our workers right here. So let's go ahead and visit the URL on which our Flower is running. So when I click this link, I'll open up my browser, which is Chrome, and then a beautiful user interface is going to be run just like you see right here. So on this user interface, we can be able to monitor and see the worker that we have. So for our example, this is going to be our Celery worker, and this Celery worker is the one that we're actually running right here in our terminal. So if we are to see right here, this worker process that we're running right here is what is being given here. So we can see the details that we're actually using for this specific worker. So the implementation, the max concurrency, processes, and all those details can be found right here. So information about the broker, we are using Redis, and all its details are being written right here. Queues, if we have any specific tasks, all of those are going to be detailed right here. Configurations and all things that are needed, all that is going to be found right here. So for now, what we need to do is to just simply run a task and then see if this task is going to be added to our queue. So if we have any task, we can even see the details of those tasks. So let us try to actually create a simple task. Now what I'm going to do is to simply go inside our terminal right here. I'll create a new terminal, and inside this terminal, let me actually do this by request response thing. Now I think I need to go to my response right here. I don't know if I have this user in our database, but if I have them, then I can go ahead and delete the users. So do not mind, on my case, I have the database deleted, but then we shall have a way in which you can keep all this together. So I'm going to open up my PSQL with my user being my user and the DB name being the booklet DB, the one that we're actually using right here. So once I've connected to our database right here, and I'm then going to go ahead and simply delete from our users. Now I can afford to do this in testing and development, but in production it becomes hard for you to do that because you don't want to lose your data. What I want to do is to test out the email functionality, but we want to test out our Celery background tasks. I'm going to try to create a user for these specific details, and when I send, our account is going to be created. Now I want you to notice one thing. We now see that this task is going to be pushed right here, executed, and then it will be moved to processed. So if we go ahead and view the details of that specific tasks, we shall head over to task right here, and then we can see what is being performed. So for our case, this task is going to be one to send our email, just like you see right here. It will be uniquely identified by this UUID, and then we can have the state of that specific task, which is success. We can see the specific details that were sent with that task, and if we have any keyword arguments that we sent, those will be added right here. Since we are not returning anything, that's why we are being brought to the result of none, and then we can have all the other details. So this was received at this time, it started at this time, and then it succeeded at this time. So using Fly, you can be able to get all those details and be able to visualize them via this graphical user interface. Now, to make this interesting, I'm going to call that endpoint that we created for sending simple emails. So I'm going to send this multiple times, and then we shall visualize how those tasks are going to be sent. So I'll go ahead and send very many emails, and then all those are going to be sent right here. So we have 4 being active, and then they'll be processed, and then they'll go ahead and succeed. So we now see, just like you see right here, it's active and then sent to process, and then after, if you have any that failed, we shall see all of them failing and being displayed right here. So you can even see their details, just like you see right here, and all those will be added to the list of tasks that are stored within our result backend. So even when I go to my email, I'll still notice that all these emails are going to be sent to my email, and all that functionality is going to be offloaded off my server, which is beautiful, which is interesting. Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying this course. Now, I've not been active in the previous weeks or two, and I'd like to say that this video series is actually remaining with just two topics. Some of the others I will cover in later videos that I'll make about FastAPI. So please feel free to leave them down in the description below. I've also made this course publicly available on the website that I'm going to leave in the description. This website is going to contain all the course material for this course, including code and explanations that I've not gone so much into explaining in this course. My plans for this course are to make this course one that I can renew every year or renew with every release of FastAPI. So let's say if FastAPI goes in a certain direction, then this can be one of the ways I can make some course that can be renewed and a course that can be made to have the latest features of FastAPI. So you can please help me to achieve that, as I'm going to be leaving the link to the code and the documentation of the website in the description. I hope you're enjoying this course. Now I'm going to be talking about API testing, and I'm going to be introducing to you a very nice way in which you can test your APIs one that's very hassle free, but one that thoroughly allows you to test your API endpoint. And this is one way that has been new to me. I don't know if you guys have been using it, but I'm not going to give you that much spoilers. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video and see you later in the next video. Bye.